Hi, everybody, and welcome to week 6. Congratulations on making it this far. So I wanted to address something before I start into the actual meat of the video. Several of your responses to the Genesis story related to how none of you are feeling good enough, I guess is a way to say it. A lot of you seem to be struggling with this feeling of not being worthy, or just an overall insecurity with who you are as a person. And I wanted to address that because that's extremely important. Your core belief about yourself is usually established by the time you're 7 years old. And the way you learn your core belief is by how you see your parents treating themselves. So if you have a parent that's particularly hard on themselves, you start to see that and practice that in yourself. We just observe the world around us when we're little. Turbulence, maybe we didn't have enough food at one point in our life, or we moved around a lot and became feeling insecure. But we establish that core belief of ourselves very, very early in life. So every single one of you probably has already established a core belief. Either you don't feel like you're fitting the proper mold of society, or you don't feel like you're good enough, or you don't feel like you're attractive enough, smart enough. But those beliefs were given to us when we were very, very little, and habits are what maintain those beliefs in our life. One of the biggest and best things that you guys can each do for yourself right now is recognize that core belief that you have about yourself. If it's negative, if it's I'm not worthy, I'm not beautiful, I'm not worth loving, you need to recognize it, and you need to practice eliminating that belief from your life. What that might look like is journaling for just 10 minutes a day, and that can be also your prayer time, saying, I don't feel good enough, I don't feel worthy, I don't feel loved, but future me will. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. That's something that I've had to work on in my own life. It's been a struggle. We all have that negative belief about ourselves, but I just wanted to address that first off. So as we dive into week 6, I want to go over some of the things that we talked about with the Adam and Eve story in Genesis. When Catholics read the Bible, we start with the literal sense, which means, what is this story exactly telling me? Then we need to bring in the spiritual senses of Scripture, because that Adam and Eve story about the creation of man had nothing to do with man being made out of clay, had nothing to do with talking snakes. The story was meant to tell you that you are intentional, you are wanted, and you're able to choose if you want a relationship with God. It's important for you to move forward in Scripture when you read it to the allegorical sense, which is how does this point us to Christ? The moral sense, which is how does Christ desire us to act? And the anagogical sense, which reveals the eternal significance of Scripture, essentially like what heaven and hell are. So we talked about the Adamic covenant. So that's the first covenant that we see in the Bible. A covenant is a way that God extends a family bond with us. Old Testament actually means Old Covenant. New Testament actually means New Covenant. The Adamic covenant, we see that God created this perfect place for people where they get to choose if they want to be with God, and Adam and Eve essentially chose sin. The next covenant that's established is with Noah. So the story of Noah, I'm going to try not to say so many times, because when I look at these videos and I see myself saying so, it drives me really insane. With Noah, essentially Noah is the only person interested in this town in having a relationship with God, in being saved. God tells him, I'm going to flood the earth, build an ark. And people look at Noah and they're like, this guy is absolutely insane. Noah builds the ark, he brings the animals on. Eventually, after they float in the water for a really long time, he lands, lets the animals out, and then Noah gets drunk and naked and breaks his covenant with God. This story, if we stay in the literal sense, when we're talking about Noah in the boat, sailing off, God being, seemingly horrible and flooding the earth and killing absolutely everybody except for Noah's family, we're not going to get out of the story what we're meant to get. Here is what you are meant to pull from Noah's covenant. First, Noah chose God. Everybody else had the opportunity in this story. This story is borrowed from Mesopotamian culture. Okay, so you don't have to believe the factual evidence in this story. Noah chose God. God was like, hey, will you choose me? He said, yeah, I will build a boat. He built a boat. He followed God's commands. The water is meant to symbolize something for us. When each of you are baptized, what that does is it washes away sin. We saw that the first sin started with Adam and Eve. In the story of Noah, we see a cleansing of the earth, a washing away from sin. And this is meant to tell you sin causes death, not necessarily I've been drowned or stabbed or whatever kind of death. Sin causes death inside of us. It chips away at our soul little by little by little. And any of you that have ever engaged in a repeated sin know that you feel it. You understand what I'm talking about. Whether it's gossip or lying, you can feel it chipping away little by little. So sin causes death, and we get the symbolism of the floodwaters baptism. Now, when we move on to the Abrahamic covenant, that's the one that follows. Abraham was originally Abram, and at this point Noah had broken his covenant with God, so God found Abraham and he just saw him to be a really, really good person. Abram, sorry, I'm going to keep saying Abraham because his name does change. Abram and his wife Sarai do not have any children. God comes to Abram and says, I would like to establish my covenant with you. What Abram does is he takes 4 animals, he cuts them in half, separates the bodies, and lights them on fire. Why does he do this? The Jewish people understood, and that's the main audience. Remember, Jesus was a Jew. Jews understood that whenever you sacrificed something and split it in a covenant agreement with somebody else, you were saying, if I break this covenant bond with you, let what happened to these animals happen to me. So Abram and God make a covenant, and God tells Abram that you are going to have, essentially, the Messiah is going to come from your genealogy. It's going to come from your line. And, Abram, what's really amusing about Abram, he was old. His wife had not been able to have any children. And Abram and Sarah hatch a plan together. They say, God promised that we would have a son. They don't believe that God can fulfill his promise, essentially, without their intervention. So what Sarah does is says, I can't have kids, so go sleep with my maidservant Hagar. So she gives her maidservant to Abram, and Abram fathers a child with Hagar. That's Ishmael. So whenever we look at the Muslim community, they actually follow Ishmael, who was born from this bond with Abram and Abram and Hagar. God, he comes to Abram and he says, essentially, why did you do this? And God still wants to establish a covenant with Abram. At this point, remember how I just told you about the sacrifices, how Abram cut the animals in half and split it. If I break my covenant bond with you, let the same thing happen to me that happened to these animals. God says, I want to establish my covenant with you. From your lineage will my descendant come. He tells Abram at this point, your name is no longer Abram, it is now Abraham. Your wife Sarai, her name is no longer Sarai, it is now Sarah. To seal our covenant, there's always a sacrifice with a covenant. To seal this covenant, you must cut a piece of your flesh. So this is where circumcision comes. I will let you guys Google that if you want to know what that is, if you don't already know. But that's where circumcision comes. It is now established in a covenant that anybody that follows this covenant line, all of the men must be circumcised. So it's essentially cutting off a little piece of their manhood. And Abram does it. Sarai, now Sarah, gets pregnant with Isaac, and Isaac is born. At this point, Ishmael's like a teenager, Anyway, so as the story goes on, Abram is tested. About this time, Ishmael, I am so sorry, everybody. I hope you can follow me. I'm mixing up names. At this time, Abram's son, Isaac, is a teenager, and God tells Abraham, I need you to sacrifice your only begotten son. So what happens? Abram, his son Isaac, head to the top of the mountain. Isaac is a teenager at this time, and also at this time, Abraham is extremely, extremely old. In our minds, we kind of picture like Abraham holding a small child and carrying him up a mountain, but that is not how this story would have gone out. Isaac is a teenager. Isaac is more than likely very, very aware of what's about to happen. Abraham and Isaac walk up the side of the mountain. Isaac's carrying wood. He's essentially walking to his death. And at the moment that Isaac is about to be killed, they are told to stop the sacrifice at that moment, because this is not the perfect sacrifice, and God provides a ram to be sacrificed at that moment. In this story right here, there are several things that you need to pull that tell us about who Christ is going to be. And this is really important. When Jesus goes to be sacrificed, he carries wood. He walks to his death up the side of a mountain, carrying wood, knowing he is about to die, the only begotten Son of God. In Genesis 22, Isaac is referred to as Abraham's only begotten son. These words used in the Old Testament with Abraham and the New Testament with Christ are very important, that they are both, the exact same terminology is used. So Isaac walks up the mountain, the only begotten son, to be sacrificed. Sacrifices were made for sins. They were made to seal covenants, and they were made for sin. What you would do in Jewish communities, if you sinned, you had to place your sin on the animal, and the animal had to die. This was meant to teach the community that when you sin, you cause death. Don't sin. I'm really happy we don't do that, because that would completely devastate me. But it was meant to teach them, when you are a sinner, something is going to die when you keep sinning. Isaac was this beautiful sacrifice. He meant everything to Abraham. It was Abraham's only son. Walk up the mountain, and God said, no, this is not the correct sacrifice. Gave them a ram. He told Abraham, the Messiah will be a descendant of yours. This is pivotal to us understanding why the Jewish community believed that Jesus was the Messiah, because his father, his earthly father, his adopted father, Joseph, is a descendant of Abraham, like a blood relative to Abraham. And we're going to go and talk about David. Next, we're going to talk about which covenant is it? Yeah, we're going to talk about Moses next. Then we will talk about David. And Mary, the Virgin Mary, is a descendant of the line of David. So this is important. Remember this. Now, your assignment to respond to this, you can talk about the similarities between Isaac and Jesus. If you need to go and read it in the Bible, it's in Genesis 22. So you can write 200 words on the similarities with Jesus and Abraham, or you can just talk about something that stands out to you, or you can ask questions. But I need you to write approximately 200 words for this. If this helped you understand Moses in the Bible a little bit better, Noah or Abraham in the Bible a little bit better, let me know. If you have any questions regarding it, let me know. But yeah, 200 words, email it to beowens@ctkparishfs.com with your name in the subject, and also the video number so that I can give you credit for it. And if you're having any problems with these assignments or anything like that, please let me know. I'm trying to make this as painless as possible. Next Wednesday will be our in-person class. It is optional, so if you're not comfortable with coming in person, which I know many people are not at this point, you don't have to come. But if you come, you don't have to do the video next week. Next week's video is going to be from Father Norman, Laura McFall's husband, and then the video following that video 8 will be the one that we talk about Moses. So anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I've really enjoyed reading your responses.